G'day guys, up next we've got Patrick Hynds, who is the Microsoft Regional Director out of Boston, and we talk about the future of Microsoft in his opinion. We talk about the Surface, we talk about why Microsoft will continue to invest in Silverlight as a contingency platform. We talk about how developers have to choose between C# and JavaScript, so check it out. Okay, I'm going to start with the Surface. Is the Surface what it needs to be? Is this going to grab a chunk of the market share?
So the Surface that we got is the WinRT version, not the Intel version. I found it very easy to use. I've been navigating with my thumbs. I've been swiping and pushing and dragging and dropping and doing lots of things. I'm very used to using the iPad, and I found it to be a very good device. There's some notable things that people are complaining about. Mostly around no GPS involved on the system and no 3G involved. So that means that you need a Wi-Fi access point or phone tethering or something like that in order to get it off if you don't have Wi-Fi.
Right, okay, well that's good. I was just talking to a guy from the UK who works in Korea building all the software for the large ships, which most of the large ships are built in Korea. Right. And they had tried to do a rollout of the Androids, 4,000 Androids, and that hadn't panned out, so they are rolling out Surfaces now. And the reason for that is this way they don't. One of the big problems that they had was trying to convert all the software to run on Android. This way they'll have the chance of not having to convert all their software to run the Surface. And in fact, inside the ships, they're putting all these signals so that everybody can walk around throughout the ship because they're like steel cages.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a great business scenario. So that's why he's here.
Cool.
So you've been in the industry for a long time. Tell us about where you see where we're going and where we're probably not going.
So, I mean, there's so much to that. Right now, Microsoft has released Windows 8 with Windows Phone 8, and they've tied together their ecosystem. You can develop with most of the same code base for the phone, for the tablet, for the desktop. The big question is whether Windows 8 is going to be on the desktop everywhere. They've made the pricing very aggressive. They made it available to pretty much all the enterprises. I think where it's going to go slower than people are hoping is in the enterprise. Most of the enterprises I deal with, some of the large banks, some of the military and governments, they're not upgrading even to Windows 7 yet. They're still on XP for many of their systems. They're just rolling out Windows 7 in a lot of cases, and it's going to be a long time before they go to Windows 8. And in some cases, maybe they'll skip Windows 8 and go right to 9. That's not going to slow down this progress, this improvement, because what that means is you've got one ecosystem where you can write an application that'll hit all these targets. And with this, a lot of the same code, you can even hit the Windows 7 desktops. You can actually put a .NET application in the Windows Store. It just shows up differently and it doesn't deploy automatically. It's just a different way of doing things. Where I think there's a lot of confusion is Silverlight, because the word's not mentioned. No one said the word here.
That's right, they haven't.
And what I believe is, and I have no basis for this, I've not been told this by anybody, but just based on what I've seen, Silverlight's a contingency plan. It's a very solid platform that allows Microsoft to project their code to other platforms. Well, if they're successful, they're the only platform that matters. They'll compete with iPad and Apple, iPhone, all that stuff, and they'll become the dominant force in the tablet market and the phone market. That's their hope. But if that doesn't happen, they need to be able to project their code to those other platforms, and Silverlight's a way to maybe do that. So I don't believe anybody at Microsoft's willing to call Silverlight dead, because it's not. They just came out with a new version. They're still supporting it.
Are you saying XAML is the new version of Silverlight?
Well, Silverlight 5 did come out. We just had Silverlight 5 just a little while ago, just less than a year ago.
Oh, right.
So It's less than a year since we had a new version of Silverlight.
Right, but you're not calling the Metro-style apps in WinRT the new Silverlight.
That's not my understanding. I guess it depends on how things go. If Microsoft's really good, they have contingency plans. I would expect, if I was in their shoes, I would plan for the best, expect the worst. Right. So I would prepare for, what if our strategy doesn't work? What if iPhone and iPad stay dominant? What if we're playing catch up down the road? What if we have to reach across the aisle and deploy code on those devices. Well, what could we use? How about Silverlight? How about those kinds of devices? So I don't think anybody's willing to say Silverlight's dead or that modern UI WinRT is the new version of Silverlight until they know whether their strategy is working. And that makes sense. So we're not going to know for another year whether Silverlight's going to be a dead term, even though it's not a dead technology, or it's going to be a term that comes back.
So are you saying that Microsoft are betting everything on HTML5? If that didn't pan out, then Silverlight is kind of the backup plan?
I don't think they're betting everything on HTML5. I think they're hoping that HTML5 allows them the reach across to other platforms. What I'm seeing is I'm not seeing the uptake of developers flocking to HTML5 JavaScript. Most of the questions here, most of the questions I see at the user groups, most of the sessions I see, there's interest in HTML5 and JavaScript, but most people are still developing with C# or C++. So I really think that, and I even was in a session yesterday where someone asked the question, well, HTML5 and JavaScript is the preferred language now, does that mean you're abandoning .NET? And the answer was a resounding no, we're not abandoning .NET, we're reinvesting in it, we're pushing C#, C# is going to get lots of love. I think there was a misunderstanding of the message, because I never heard that HTML5 is the only way to go, but I think there was a hope that that would be the bridge to other platforms and making inroads on other platforms. If that fails, well then Microsoft needs a strategy in that space, and Silverlight would be a good one. Having declared Silverlight dead, they'd have cut off that strategy.
Right. So I'll come back to ask you.
That's just my explanation.
I'll come back on the marketing, the marketing ideas. But as a developer, I've now got to build apps, and I'll be, in many cases, being given the choice: am I going to build this business app in XAML and C#, what we know and love for a long time, or we're just going to, just go with the world loves JavaScript and we're going to use a new Win.js and HTML5. Which way would you be going? And I'm sure that it depends, but I want to know it depends. When are you going to choose one and when are you going to choose the other? And what's going to be the most popular?
I'm seeing more popularity with XAML and C# across the board. There's interest in the other things, but there's been interest in everything that Microsoft puts out. The question is whether it actually gets used for projects. I don't know of a lot of HTML5 JavaScript projects that are being used for large corporations, or I just don't see it. So maybe I'm missing that part of the market. Maybe it's because I don't swim in those waters. But I bet my money on C# and XAML before I would go into HTML5 and JavaScript. Now, I also think that HTML5 and JavaScript are going to be playing catch-up in a lot of areas that, other than the WinRT side. And so there's very few people who are saying, I'm just going to develop an app and I'm only going to support WinRT style devices. You still have desktops, you still have phones, you still have a lot of things. One of the things that I think is also holding back the modern UI, which is what they're calling it now that the Metro term is out of style, or WinRT as I call them, WinRT style applications, or Windows 8 style applications, is there's no data model. You can't use ADO.NET, you can't use Entity Framework, you can't use any of that stuff. You have to consume an OData service or a JSON service. So that means that it's not really, it's going to have to talk to another component if the target doesn't already have those services available. And a lot of things don't.
That's right. So do you think platforms out there, and I'm thinking platforms like SharePoint, which is pretty good in terms of supporting those formats, but TFS and CRM, which aren't as good, do you think they've all got to support OData?
No, I think what'll happen is people will start building middleware again. We're back to the future. So I'll give you an example. There's a client that I've dealt with for years that has a mainframe application they're not getting rid of anytime soon. They're still going to have a mainframe. They're an insurance company. They have vehicle identification number lookups, and that code they're not going to rewrite because they're not going to rehome the database. Well, that doesn't support OData. So what they'll do is they'll build an interface with a OData side to it that talks to that mainframe. And that's what we did in the web service days back in 2000 or 2001 when .NET first came out. But the hope was we could get away from that. If WinRT could talk to ADO.NET even, then a lot of these problems would go away. But there's always a new problem. I think in this round the new problem is that WinRT doesn't allow you to talk to the database directly. That's a problem for me on some of my projects. So that's the thing that's in some cases driving us from, there are several solutions that we're going to build on WinRT. There's several we can't because the client's not willing to build a server somewhere running to be the interface. Right,
okay. Well, that's interesting. I want to just go back because I'm still thinking about how you're so bullish on XAML. And I want to ask you, assuming you are in charge of marketing at Microsoft, which I'm glad you're not, but the Silverlight article by Mary Jo Foley, Silverlight, we've changed our direction.
Yeah.
That caused a lot of damage. If you could go back in time, do you think it would have been better for Microsoft to have said instantly something like, look, it's not dead, where it's going to be in the next version of Windows, and it might have a new name, or it might be called Silverlight 7. We haven't decided, but what everyone's inferring from Mary Jo Foley's article is incorrect.
When Bob Moglia said that, he said it and nothing else was said by him. If he had come back and addressed and said, what I meant by this was this, and came out with a Silverlight as a name is something we're trying to figure out where it fits in with this, with what you'll see we're going to announce. But the technology is staying, the method of development is staying, the power, the cross-platform, a better word would have been cross-form factor. Okay.
That's interesting.
Okay. Then that would have helped everyone understand, okay, you have contingency plans. It's okay to admit you have a contingency plan. My customers like it when I have a contingency plan because it doesn't mean I'm just hoping for everything to turn out for the best. That's actually the sign of knowing how the world works. Right. To pretend that your plans are going to go off without a hitch and there won't be any problems is delusional, and it's what gets people in trouble. And so I think that's why they didn't want anybody to see that. Now, again, I don't have any inside information on this. This is my watching. And a lot of it came from the fact that nothing was said after what Bob said. Because Microsoft had every opportunity to address this and to say, no, what we meant was this, and they just silence. Now, when Silverlight 5 came out, that became the defense. Well, of course we're not killing Silverlight. Look at this, we've got a new version out. Well, there's the last version of everything. So the answer still came back, okay, but is this the next version? What I would have done if I was in charge of marketing would say, look, Silverlight is a technology that we're folding into a lot of areas. We're trying to decide whether the name and the purpose of Silverlight, what's going to play in the next versions. But for now, you're not going to hear us use the word Silverlight too much. It doesn't mean it's dead. It doesn't mean there's not going to be another version. It means we're trying to make sure we do the right thing for developers. If they'd said that, it'd be a non-issue. We wouldn't be talking about Silverlight now.
That's right. And I might have chosen the wrong spot, but I chose near these surfaces. Have you seen how busy this area is? Yes. Everyone wants to check it out.
That's cool.
So I want to, before I let you go, I want to ask you about security. You've been, watching security, getting deep in security for a long time now.
Yep.
You've heard of all the mess developers get themselves into. You've heard all the war stories. I won't get onto the war, but you've heard all the war stories. But what are some of the quintessential things you tell developers so they don't get themselves into those war stories?
So the biggest thing is understand your threat model. So if you know what the risks are, you can protect against them. So you and I have walked through some city streets late at night in some cities all over the world, and sometimes I go without a wallet and without a phone so that I'm not a target. I know when I'm in an area where that's a problem. Sometimes we decide not to walk because it's better to drive or to get a cab because of that. We're doing threat assessments. People do it all the time. Developers seem to fail to do it because they forget how the world works when it comes to their code. You have to think about how people are addressing their product, how they're going to be using it, what the vulnerabilities can be. One of the biggest vulnerabilities we're seeing on the web right now is cross-site scripting, XSS. And the reason it's become one of the biggest problems, in fact, 80% of the vulnerabilities that we're seeing are in some way shaped by XSS. Cross-site scripting is a vulnerability where your website is used by someone bad to attack your users, not you, not your website, not your infrastructure. Well, guess what? SQL injection was a vulnerability, which we still see occasionally, but was a vulnerability that allowed the attacker to attack your site and take it down. You were very keen on fixing that. When the threat is to your users, most websites are a lot less anxious or even interested in dealing with it. And so a lot of times it's the user that's now at risk as opposed to the sites.
Right, all right. Well, thank you. Now, before I let you go, I just want to, I've always been curious, how did you end up being the first person on .NETRocks and the first person on that RunAsRadio show?
So when Carl Franklin first came up with the idea, he and I were co-Microsoft regional directors in New England, and he came up with this idea that he was going to do a podcast, and it was going to be great. It was going to be called .NETRocks, and he wanted me to be the first guest because we were close friends and we had been RDs for a little while together. We had done dev days together. He knew I was. We worked together pretty well, so we figured there'd be some chemistry. And so I said sure, thinking that only him and his grandmother would ever hear the recordings. And so I was the first guest. And then I was I was a guest several other times. I've been on probably 6 or 7 times throughout the years. And then when they did RunAsRadio, they decided that I should be the first guest for that and first guest for every other show they do. So if they do more, I'll probably be the first guest there as well.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's been great talking to you, and thank you for all the information.
Thank you.
With that, that's Adam Cogan signing off.